We're back with Dr. Wells, and we're going to talk about the athletic facilities. Dr. Wells, at the Facilities, Safety, and Transportation Committee meeting, you had a presentation from John Kinnear from the Rettler Corporation. Can you tell me what the purpose of the presentation was?
Certainly. The Facilities, Safety, and Transportation Committee has, along with some other committees of the board, been looking at the concept of improving the athletic facilities of the school district. And this particularly was around the outdoor athletic facilities of the school district. And as most of the public knows, this has been going on for over a period of a number of years. So the purpose of Mr. Kinnear coming back at this point was to take the master plan or the master array of athletic facilities improvement that had come forward earlier in 2016, and then to break that down so that it was a tiered approach, and those tiers, that name was given to talk about the different levels. As an example, a tier 1 would be a basic facility. In other words, let's just use baseball as an example. If I were to be putting in a baseball diamond or a baseball area, if the district were to put in a baseball area, tier 1 would be the basic baseball requirements in order to have varsity sports. All right. Tier 2 might be some enhancement to that, such as an example, lights. Perhaps lights aren't necessary. So tier 1 would be the basic, tier 2 might be the lights. Tier 3 might be a restroom or concessions facility on that property. Not saying that that's in there, but that's just an example. So what Mr. Kinnear did was he brought back the facility plan for each of the sites, the high school, the property across the street from the high school at Madison Elementary School, and then the middle school, and talked about those facility improvements that the earlier committee had recommended and what would be basically a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 improvement to that site. In addition, there is this concept of which improvement needs to be done first so that a second improvement can happen. As an example, there is some conversation around the concept of baseball, softball being taken care of prior to an all sports stadium or multi-sports facility stadium being built at the high school so that the property would be available and baseball, softball could go on unimpacted. So that would be perhaps a phase 1, phase 2 then maybe being a multi-sports complex, and then maybe phase 3, anything else that would need to be done. So to summarize, it was to talk about what would be the levels or tiers, and then what would be the order or sequencing, and the term was used as phasing, of when these projects would be done.
Now, you received some feedback from the committee.
We did.
And can you tell me a little bit about the feedback?
Yeah, this was all presented to the Facilities Committee, 3 board members, and they really took quite a bit of time that evening to listen to Mr. Kinnear, to hear this presentation. And this was done, this was developed with the input of the athletic director and some other administrators. In the end, there was some consideration about, okay, let's just talk about, as an example, a multi-sports athletic facility would need to have some restrooms. Well, there are restrooms within the building. Those restrooms would be over in the commons area of the high school. So if we as a district determined that restrooms were perhaps a tier 2 or something that could be done later, an add-on to a multi-sports field or complex, stadium, then where would those restroom uses be when that originally opened? And so there was some conversation around restrooms and concessions. Should that be a tier 1 or a tier 2? Given the fact that the size and the numbers of restrooms that you have to have is determined by code, and there's quite a few that would be needed to be available. So that was one of the points of conversation. Also, in the only site where a multi-sport athletic complex would be, is currently bus drop-on, drop-off bus staging for the transfers of students who then go from different places in the district. If that is developed for parking or part of that stadium, then there's still an area within the high school, within all of that though, that would be developed for the transportation. When would that be done? Would that be done as a tier 1 or a tier 2? That was a point of conversation. And then there were a few just other conversation points or questions about some of the more intricate parts, such as field development, irrigation, those types of things. So those were all discussed, and the committee came to consensus around what would be a tier 1 and what would be a tier 2 with some of those points that they brought up.
So did you make adjustments to?
Yes, the committee did ask Mr. Kinnear to make some adjustments to his original planning method, his presentation, and bring that back. Mr. Kinnear will be coming back at a board meeting and presenting this on behalf of the facility committee, this very same or similar presentation to the full board, so that the full board can be made aware of where the facility committee is in the process and hear the same information.
And what is the next step after the presentation to the board?
Well, I'm not really sure at this point, to be completely honest. The board needs to hear that information. The finance committee has been also, we have had 2 committees that have been looking at the athletic facilities, simply because obviously we are not asking the taxpayers at this point for any assistance with this. The finance committee hasn't talked about or made a final decision about how to bring about any athletic facility changes. There have been things talked about in the community, such as fundraising. We hear that quite a bit, or donors. Many stadiums that are being developed are actually being developed that way at this point. So all of that has not been decided. The committee talked a little bit about what's the feasibility within the community for community giving of this type. Certain individuals, both at that committee and not at that committee, have heard of others or been contacted by others who have interest in this or are wondering how to get this kick-started. So the next part of this really is, there's 2 parts, is what about the finance of this? What's the district's direction so that anyone who is in the community would know what that is? That's really a big next step for this process. And then to hear the feedback from the full board at the next board meeting, where they hear about the tiering and the sequencing, or what will be referred to as phasing, of this particular improvement proposal.